Well, hello everybody. Can you believe it? It's the end of the term and it's time for us to find out what's going to be on the final exam. So let's just jump into it and find out what is going to be on the final exam. So let us get into this final exam. And the first thing you need to know, of course you already know this, is that it's going to be very similar to what we did with the midterm. It'll be 1 week only, and it starts December 1st and runs through December 8th in the same place, the testing center over there. That's this Thursday when it starts, and it'll end the following Thursday. And I always want to emphasize that during finals week, there is a mad rush for, all the other classes are going into the testing center as well. There's a mad rush, and they do close early on Thursday of finals week. So it behooves you to get in there as soon as you can to take the exam. And also remember to check Saturday hours, and we'll emphasize that later. There it is right there again. I emphasize that. You don't have the leisure of late hours on Thursday of finals week. That would be next week. So get there early. There'll be no makeup exams, so don't even ask about that. And again, to emphasize that, they are open on Saturday. I believe it's like 9 to 1, I think. Don't quote me on that, but that's what it has been. So check Saturday hours. Okay. And it's going to be like the midterm. It's just going to be 50 questions again, an objective exam. And it'll pick up mostly on everything since the midterm. So, you can check this for sure by looking at the study guide, which is available now on Moodle. You can download that. I think once you take a look at that study guide for this half of the term, I think you're going to like that study guide. I think it's going to really impress you, and you're going to smile, and I'll just say Merry Christmas. Okay. Again, it's in the same place, the Instructional Testing Services in the center building. It's 311. You remember all the same stuff. I mean, you've already gone through this, but I just have to remind you of it. Photo ID is required. Yes, you can use one 3x5 note card. And be sure to check and verify the hours of the testing lab, because you want to make sure you're in there on time. And also follow the center's rules and requirements. They will ask you to do certain things. You've already been there, so you know that. But some people don't learn. And I just want to emphasize, if they say take your hat off, take your hat off. Do all of those things so you can take the exam. Okay. Now, with regard to extra credit, if you are doing extra credit, it is due December 6th. That is a week from tomorrow. It is due in my office by 10:30. Now, you can hand deliver it to me if you so desire, or just send an email. If you are doing the paper, it's best to convert it to a PDF file and attach that to your email. If you're doing the video part, if you so desire, just if you can somehow embed it in that, that's fine. It's any way that I can get it and look at it in time to give you the extra credit. Now, if you're still doing the old-fashioned way by the post office, it must be postmarked by December 2nd, but it's been a while since somebody has sent that to me. So anyway, just to remind you that the last day for the extra credit is a week from tomorrow. It is due at that time, December 6th. Okay, so then what's on the exam? We're going to cover everything as you see there. We're going to cover everything in the combat film through film in the television age. So let's start with the combat war film. What do you need to know? Well, they emphasize these things right here, these features of the genre. First, laws and morality are suspended. In war, anything goes, at least according to Hollywood. They switch from the individual to the group, to the troops. This is a key component of the war film, the combat film, however you want to describe it, because it is now what's important is the entire group, and usually, since war films deal with small groups, the soldiers in a small group that have an assignment that must be done, must be accomplished, a goal that has to be reached. And often what you see in this is one person who often sacrifices for the entire group. And third, women are depicted in the war movie as emotional element that brings out male vulnerability. In the war film, as explained in our video series, it's very much a very testosterone-rich movie. It's all about men and men's relationship with each other, and the whole idea of bravery, all the things, you know, the toughness, etc. But a woman shows up in these films, and it suddenly brings about that vulnerability. The example that I always like to talk about this film is a John Wayne film called The Sands of Iwo Jima. Because if you see that film, if you get a chance to see that film, you'll see John Wayne plays John Wayne. He is the toughest Marine that ever lived. And then there is a very tender scene, actually, where he meets a woman who is trying to seduce him, essentially, and get money from him. She's a barfly in the old lingo of the time. And what he finds out is she needs the money for her child, the baby, and this sort of thing. And suddenly John Wayne melts. Okay, the combat film also understand the anti-war sentiments and post-war films. After the war, during World War II, after the war is over, some of the subject matter changes, and what you get are some anti-war sentiments in there. And also, they like to talk, our video series, War Films and Portrayal of Racial Integration of the Armed Forces. This also occurred, for the most part, in the post-war films. Okay, the fundamental American philosophy or ideology that's embedded in American war films is this: we may not always win physically, but we are always right ideologically. That's essentially what World War II films were about. Hollywood produced films that stated we may not always win physically, we may lose the battle, but we win the war. Okay. Also in all of this is propaganda. And during the war, Hollywood certainly was in league with the government, and the government set up the Office of War Information, and this was the role of the government in Hollywood film production. And essentially what it was propaganda, and it was shaping public opinion. It was all for the cause. Movies that were made in order to do two things is the way I always argue it. One is rah, 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 we've got to win. It's like almost like films that are there so that the team will succeed, and also to assuage the fears of defeat that was overwhelming the stay-at-home crowd, the people who were left behind, not knowing what is going on. You know, we don't have instant information, but trying to say it's all going to work out and we're all in this together. The important thing here, too, is the Sergeant York formula, which depicts the conversion of an objector to a supporter of the war. That was an important war film that was made called Sergeant York, which was about a real fellow in World War I who objected to the war, that is World War I, and later became a supporter of it and was a decorated hero. So they made this biography of Sergeant York, and they during the war, and that was pretty much a basic formula here. And that same formula was used 20 years later in John Wayne's film, The Green Berets. which was a film to counter all of the anti-war sentiments that was going on at the time. Okay, then we move into everyone's favorite genre, if it is a genre, and that is film noir. As our series states, is it a true genre? What we do know is that it was discovered by the French, and the French gave it the name, meaning black film, and the reason they identified it as such is because it was always, or the films seemed to be always done at night. They were adaptations of American pulp fiction and what is known as hard-boiled novels, the hard-boiled detective. And as I mentioned, they were discovered and they debuted as such, that is, we recognize them, and, or at least the French recognized them, wrote about them in post-war France through Cahiers du Cinéma, through Truffaut and those people. They were the ones that seem to have discovered it. Now, what is it specifically? It is defined, or at least we talk about it in terms of its setting. The uniqueness of the film noir is that its setting is very much urban. It is the center of the city. It is usually, as it says, the third point there, it is the sleazy side of city life. This is down in what we used to call Skid Row. This is the place where you never went at night. The other interesting thing about it is its photographic quality, and that is when they were filming these things, as I mentioned earlier, it was filmed at night, give it that idea, that black film idea, but also it seemed to always have rain-slick streets. It was always raining in this downtown area. And as such, we got a lot of great photographers to give us these chiaroscuro images of the light shadow. And the themes, okay, what we have is alienation. All of the characters are depicted as alienated from each other, from society, and even from themselves. It is also a great depiction of the philosophy of existentialism in the sense that you have no exit. You can't get out of this. You're stuck. This is where you belong. This is where you're going to live, and this is where you're going to die. The character types are often amnesiacs. Okay, people who, for whatever reason, cannot remember the past. In some cases, it's literal. They do suffer from amnesia. They just can't remember it. In others, it's sort of figurative. It is they have a past, but they don't want to remember that past. They want to escape that past. They are also antisocial loners. They are just people who do not get along with other people. They do not get along with society. They just do not get along even with themselves. And these are crime shows for the most part. They are crime shows, and the central figure is often a private detective. He's not a member of the police department. He's not an official, not a government official, but he is a private detective, and as such, he gets to get away with a lot of things that police would not be able to get away with. Also, the style. That is the key point about film noir. That's why the question always is asked, is it a true genre? Is it really its own uniqueness in the sense of its storytelling and its narrative, or is it really defined by the way that film looks? If we do that, one of the interesting things is if we look at all of these elements that you see right here, film style with regard to film noir, it's low-key lighting, the shadowy elements, what I already mentioned. We have this idea of the chiaroscuro effect. We have strange highlights, where in some of these films, the only thing you see is a person's eyes during a conversation, or perhaps even their eyes are masked by a shadow, and you just see their lips. You see all of these strange highlights like that. And then you have these extreme camera angles. The high and low angles, you know, we've got a high angle looking down or low angle looking up to see, you know, distorted images, what they call Dutch angles, in which the camera is tilted and all of that sort of thing. So we talk about that, and that essentially is what everyone seems to love about film noir. But what I just mentioned, all of that stuff can also be applied to Citizen Kane. So the question is Citizen Kane then film noir? Well, hardly anybody would think that it's film noir, but it has that style to it. So that question about whether this stuff it's a genre or what, you know, it's going to be up for debate. You know, I mean, we probably, you know, it's just safe to say, oh yeah, it's a genre. You know, if we're going to put a bunch of films in a library, and we're going to label all of these films, we're going to have horror movies, we're going to have science fiction, you're going to have westerns, you're going to have film noir. So anyway, moving on. The production code and film noir. What film noir also did was get away with a lot of stuff that was prohibited. It alluded to prohibited subjects without directly violating the code. That is, there are lots of shady characters here, and there are lots of shady relationships. And we have lots of things like people who are living together, which would not be accepted back in those days. We would have all of this sexual energy that is going on. You'll see this in films like Double Indemnity, where that's the sexual tension between Fred McMurray and Barbara Stanwyck, and I can't remember their characters' names, but that sexual tension in there, you could cut it with a knife. And then, of course, the next issue is the gender issue, in the sense that in these films, women have dominant and powerful roles. The women are depicted as femme fatales. They use their female wiles to alter men. And like in Double Indemnity, where again, the Fred McMurray character is at the complete mercy of Barbara Stanwyck. A better film that shows that is it's a low-budget film made by Producers Releasing Corporation called Detour. And in that film, we have an absolute loser of a main character, a man who has a sordid past, has no future, and gets mixed up with this femme fatale, and it leads to a reversal in which he accidentally kills her, and it is just, the guy can't win for losing. Okay. In summary then, film noir is a social commentary on post-war reality, and they do start making these after the war. Some have argued that the reason for that was this idea the war is over. During the war, women went to work. You know, the Rosie the Riveter thing. And okay, the war is over, and what are they going to do with all these men that come back? And these men come back and say, I want my riveting job back. And Rosie says, I like what I'm doing. And so you have the battle of the sexes with regard to this, that women were being very assertive at that time. So this post-war reality here, this commentary on this, and it also has this notion about modern mass American culture, the consumerism and disillusionment with Paradise Lost. That's what our video series liked. But I think there are other more interesting dynamics in there, but that's for another class. Okay, then we move into film in the television age. This is where we have a sudden decline in attendance. One of the great ironies of all time was in 1946. The war is over, and we have the largest attendance ever in the history of motion pictures. More people went to the movies than at any other time. And in 1947, it's collapsed. Fewer people are going. Now, during this time, of course, everyone always points a finger at television. And yes, television is a culprit, because after all, you know, it's this idea that, hey, why should I spend money when I can stay home and see it for nothing at home? And also the idea that some of the smaller studios, the B-type movie studios, they didn't have anything to lose, and they were selling their films to television so you could see movies on television. But they're not the only culprit, as it says there. We suddenly found ourselves with more leisure time, we had more money, and we had interest in other activities, and there was a sudden migration away from downtown to the suburbs. So this is still a business. Remember, I told you that way back at the beginning of our term. It's a business first, and so what are we going to do? What are the movie studios going to do? Well, in the beginning with television, the agreement is made that motion picture industry and TV, the agreement between them would be that TV becomes a subsidiary market for motion pictures. That was essentially true, and we see that we see that at work in the old Disneyland, Walt Disney Presents. When Disney, some people said, sold his soul to ABC television, but he sold it with the idea that ABC would bankroll 1/3 of his Disneyland project in exchange for a weekly TV show. And what Disney had in mind when he did this was he saw this as a way of promoting his own movies. So the other studios followed suit with that. But the movie industry itself had to respond to television and respond to declining audience. And so what they did was they responded through technical innovations. The first thing they did was create the 3D effect. Things were coming at you. Next, they gave us the wide screen. These were things that you could not get at home. At that time, in the early 50s, when CinemaScope comes out in 53, your TV set is like this, and it looks like a porthole in a ship. It's a round screen. And then finally, stereophonic sound. This unbelievable high fidelity of sound that would fill a movie theater. So the first thing is 3D. It's at the theater. This is the thing you have to wear the glasses. The first film to do this was called Buona Devil, an experimental film made by a guy who's noted mostly for doing radio shows. So he makes Buona Devil. It becomes a great success. And again, it is used, as you can see here, you had to wear these little glasses. They were Polaroid filters on your glasses that created this image of 3D. And I can say that I have seen this. I have seen polarized 3D movie, and it is very effective. It is really something that, ooh, that's interesting, that's nice, that's different. Things do come at you. But then they create what is known as Cinerama, which, as depicted here by this artist's conception for the ads for Cinerama, is the audience sits in front of a screen that is curved so that you can see things out of the corner of your eye. It's a peripheral thing. And it is done this way. It is shot with 3 cameras, and from those 3 angles, and then it is used in projection. Again, 3 projectors to create this huge circle, this vision, wide vision. And then it is cut down to be cheaper with the use of a very old system known as anamorphosis that was developed in the silent era. 20th Century Fox buys the lens from the French innovator named Chrétien and creates CinemaScope, which is a very, very wide screen. What it does is it squeezes. It's a lens that takes a wide-angle image and squeezes it on the film. So when you look at the film up there, as you can see, it's squeezed. And then with the compensating lens in the projector, it is then unsqueezed out into a very wide screen, roughly 2:1 aspect ratio, which is something you need to know. That, as our movie or video series continues, talks about the development then of Panavision, which is, again, the same kind of anamorphosis, but it's a finer and better lens. And the fellow who made it was named Gottschalk, and he used it right there. He said this film in Panavision 35 and Technicolor and Panasound, but what it did was it actually convinced the studios that what we need are Panavision lenses because they were finer lenses and gave us a better image. Then we also know this, panning and scanning, letterboxing, the safe action area, these things that happened with these widescreen films when they were released to TV, things that you don't want to see. You never want to see pan and scan. Then you have the AIP market, teenagers, creative innovations by the independent producers. Then along comes monsters, and you mix the monsters with the teenagers, because it is teenagers that are going to the cinema at this time. And then moving on, we have the film school generation in the 1960s, and we have two 1960s, and we have movies in transition. You have on the left the older generation, which has been going to movies, and their sexy films are things like Lover Come Back, which are unbelievably innocent. And then on the right-hand side, you have the younger generation who go to film because they've been to college, and you have sexy films like The Graduate. You also have the film school generation with all of this stuff, so what was going on in the 1960s. All of the socio-political climate of the era, the protests, the assassinations, the ideological war, Vietnam, and the generational war. It's the baby boomers versus their conservative elders. You have women's liberation, which led to a sexual revolution. Everything changed. Hollywood changed with it. Then you have all these images of things that changed. Images of women, of youth, of race, exploitation films, the crazy blaxploitation films that came out in the early 1970s. The rating system changes. You now have motion pictures that are rated for their content. And the changing face of moviegoers, people who are going to movies now, who are paying big dollars. They're younger and they're college educated and they have money. Then you have the new wave, which is part of this whole idea. You have the new wave, which comes out of France. These are the French movie critics who discover American classic films. They write about them in a film journal. This, in turn, is copied over here, and we get the same kinds of critics who discover our own movies and our own new wave directors like Hopper, Bogdanovich, Coppola. You have postmodernism, exploitation films. You have the pastiche and all of these things here. And moving on, the edge of Hollywood here has become familiar with modern filmmakers and examples of their works. These modern filmmakers are the Lucases, the Spielbergs, the Scorseses, and also filmmakers that are on the fringe, such as Julie Dash. And the bottom line here is that a movie just ain't a movie anymore. And the edge of Hollywood, all of these themes, I'm not going to go through all of those things, but the series did. And moving on to what we have today, the new media, which combines everything. We have HBO, VCRs, cable TV, we have high-definition TV. It's the growth of the home viewing audience and effect on the movie industry. And essentially what it is that new media are key subsidiary outlets for motion pictures, and as such are critical to movie industry success. You cannot produce a movie by the major Hollywood studios without considering all of the other things that go with it. You have to have soundtrack albums, novels, toys, video games, etc. And it is now horizontal control rather than vertical control, because we've come kind of all the way back at the very beginning of our series. We talked about the vertical control of all of the films of production, exhibition, or production, distribution, exhibition. Now it's all this sideways thing. So that's pretty much it. That's it. There are the things to keep in mind. The exam closes on Thursday early, and your extra credit is due on the 6th. And avoid the rush. Take the exam early. That's it, folks. Have a good Christmas. Thanks. And away we go. Any questions?